Okay, I have solved my tech problems, ready to discuss Buddhism. So make sure your note sheet is out next to you as we go through the slide, but take your time. You can pause and rewind, etc. as we go. So let's begin. What is the essence of Buddhism? Which is, I know, a question you've been asking yourself. And so here you see it's a belief in something called the middle way of wisdom and compassion. And so we'll talk more about what the Buddha means by middle way. But that word, that phrase is something you should always associate with Buddhism. You can see it is an old tradition here, and it's known for the three jewels, right? Buddha himself, the teacher. In this case, Dharma for Buddhism are the teachings of the Buddha, and then Sangha, the community of Buddhists. So, the main question that the Buddha will set out to answer, and I think that drives Buddhism in general, is what is the fundamental cause of suffering? And that answer, we will learn, is desire. So the Buddha will teach us to extinguish the self and not to obsess about oneself. Therefore, you will eliminate desire. So now you're asking, who is the Buddha? So his name is Siddhartha Gautama. There are the dates of his life. And he was born in northeast India, or what is Nepal today, and he was raised to be a king. And so there was a prophecy when he was born that he would either be a great religious leader or a great king, and his parents wanted to ensure that he becomes a powerful king. So they kind of cloistered him in his life, this great life of luxury. He saw nothing bad. But when he was young, he skipped out one night, and in his travels of the town nearby, he encountered death, he encountered old age, he encountered sickness. And by the time he was 29, right, he's a father and a husband, but he rejects it all. He, I think, literally jumps the fence of his compound, walks away from his wife and child to pursue an understanding of why is there suffering, why do these bad things happen? So for 6 years, he lived a strict ascetic life, which means ascetic is he was meditating, fasting. Legend has it they would eat 1 grain of rice a day, hoping that that would give him some insight, but it didn't. So at some point he realized it's not helping, so he rejects that extreme way of living, and he's just decided to sit in meditation until he received the answer. And this goes on for, I don't know, a day of meditation, I can't remember, an extended period of time. And at this point, he reaches something called nirvana, which is this extinguishing of yourself. And because he understood of what it takes to reach that, he became known as the Enlightened One, or the Buddha, at 35. So he stayed on earth, if you will, to kind of tell people how to do this. So something to keep in mind is Siddhartha was raised a Hindu, right? So a lot of the vocabulary and the concepts will be similar, but he'll tweak it a little bit for what he thinks, in his opinion, is better. I'm going to show you some pictures of some Buddhist art. And one here is from the 1800s CE, so fairly modern, and this is Thailand. But I picked Buddhas from different countries so you can kind of get a sense of how Buddhism is spread and then takes on a little bit of the flavor of the countries. But something to note is the earlobes. How do we know that the Buddha left this life of luxury? And it's because his ears used to hang heavy with jewels, and now that they're empty. And so Hindu art and Buddhist art is very symbolic. Remember we talked a little bit about that the other day. And so how Buddha sits, what his hands are doing, is symbolic of what moment in life they're commemorating here. The Buddha is often shown sitting on a lotus flower, which I'll explain in a second. And the position of his hands, right, speak to what is they're trying to convey. And these are called mudras. And if you remember in the video with the young woman who was the dancer, she talked about how the hands symbol certain attributes or certain aspects of the story. And so when you see hands like this formation in the Buddha statues, it's meditation. Here, one of knowledge, right? You can see that here. And then this is of discussion, right? A little bit here. When you see Buddha's hands touching to the ground, that's usually commemorating the moment of enlightenment when he understands why we suffer. And so other symbols, I mentioned the lotus flower. As you can see, it grows in kind of stagnant or impure water. It's kind of yuck, but it's beautiful. So like the lotus flower, we can rise above our circumstances. Another common artistic development is the footprint of the Buddha, not his literal footprint, but to kind of commemorate him. In Tibetan Buddhism, they do a mandala. Sorry, that's a little Midwest mandala, a wheel of life. And then sometimes you see this a lot of places, right, in our notes, the Dharma or the Eightfold Path, the teachings of the Buddha. And then here in this head of Buddha, you'll sometimes see a divot or maybe even a bump that represents the third eye, and that's what you focus on when you meditate and find wisdom. And also you'll see a commonality in both Buddhist and Hindu statues, the wide eyes. They did that on purpose so that if you're in a temple, maybe there's a lot of people around, the wide eyes then kind of the spirit of these statues or the connection with the divine or with Buddha, that it's wide enough that could encompass everybody in the temple. Another important part of Buddhism is the Tripitaka. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. So try, right? 3 baskets of teachings or the Buddhist scriptures. And so they call it the 3 baskets. It's a way of organizing, quite a lot of texts. So in one basket you have the Buddha's sermons. In another, there are rules and regulations for living a monastic life. And then the last one, maybe similar to the Talmud in Judaism, kind of these interpretations of Buddhist doctrine that have been collected over the centuries. And so this is a collection of the Tripitaka in Korea. I think it dates back to the 1400s CE. Here's a Tibetan version. And so you can see some of this will probably be the same, and these might change over the course of history. There are also several different types of Buddhism, and we'll see that as we discuss different religious traditions, that once the founder dies, sometimes people then disagree on some things, and so they branch off into different sects of Buddhism. So we'll talk about each one of these now. So the Theravada Buddhism, they claim, is the oldest school, known as the Way of the Elders or the Small Raft, meaning not everybody can do this, right? Because theoretically, the monastic life, becoming a Buddhist monk or a nun, so this is open to men and women, is the best way to achieve enlightenment and to achieve nirvana. But not everyone maybe is willing to commit to that, so that's why they call it the small vehicle, right? The small raft. Not everyone's going to ride on that raft. It's found mostly in Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Thailand, etc. So there's a focus on wisdom, achieving wisdom through meditation, and their goal is to become a Buddha, right, or enlightened one. So Buddha said, while there may be a God or there may be gods, it doesn't matter to him. You figure out your own salvation. You figure out how to become enlightened and to reach nirvana. So, Mahayana Buddhism is known as the great vehicle, right? This is for everybody, for the masses, so everybody can fit on this raft, if you will. And this is what you'll see mostly in China, Japan, and Korea. And so they seek guidance from bodhisattvas. So a bodhisattva is someone who has achieved enlightenment but kind of stays on earth, doesn't achieve nirvana, kind of puts it off while he or she helps people. And so they're going to help people escape from the wheel of samsara, right? The wheel of death, the cycle of death and rebirth. So here is a handy map feel free to commit this to memory. So we'll get to Tibetan Buddhism and then Zen Buddhism in Japan, but you can see where Theravada, right, in southeastern Asia, and then Mahayana through China, Korea, right, and then a little bit of Tibetan Buddhism. Looks like it's spread out here. But one thing I think is something you'll need to remember is that while Buddhism begins in India, it does not stay in India, right? I guess according to this map, there's a little bit of Buddhism still in India, but for the most part, Hinduism kind of overts itself over Buddhism, which you read when we talked about the Gupta and Maurya empires. Okay, so Tibetan Buddhism is the diamond vehicle, right? Multifaceted like a diamond, so there's many aspects of it. It's developed in Tibet, which is currently occupied by China today. It's a mix here of Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. And so they have these bodhisattvas, right, that have achieved this enlightenment and could achieve nirvana, but they have decided to stay back and help people. And they are called the Dalai Lamas. So lamas are different leaders, and then the leader are different bodhisattvas. But the head of all Tibetan Buddhism, and technically the God King of Tibet, is known as the Dalai Lama, and that is him today. And maybe you guys know who he is already, because everybody loves this guy. Who could not like him? And so we'll maybe talk. While he's technically the leader of Tibet, because it's occupied by China, he cannot live there. So he lives in India. And then Zen Buddhism is something maybe you might be familiar with, known as the meditation school. So while it exists in, I think it was called Chan Buddhism in China, it becomes known as Zen in Japan. But this idea of seeking, you could achieve sudden enlightenment through meditation and arriving at kind of this emptiness, right? You're emptying your mind of distractions. And so they use beauty, nature, maybe the getting into the ceremony of pouring tea, right, in its simplicity of archery, calligraphy, that you kind of lose your mind, you lose your sense of yourself, or your mind is emptied as you concentrate on doing this beautifully. Okay, so, sorry, I'm going to pause here because these videos only let me go for 15 minutes, and I need to talk a little bit about Buddhist teachings. So, you're going to have to watch 2 videos. Aren't you lucky?